running out through some of the suburbs of Christchurch and then up across the Canterbury Plains to Springfield. We have a very enjoyable trip over to Greymouth, Westport and back from here to Christchurch.
As I embark on what is my first day of a journey to Westport and back, the same cannot be said for the crew at Mainline Steam, as their first day started yesterday, lighting up and preparing the locomotive for the trip ahead. The depot that we're now passing is where the locomotive is kept and where yesterday's work was done. We'll travel southwards on the main line as far as the town of Rolleston before turning westwards towards the southern Alps, and our first night stop at Greymouth. While the Canterbury Plains may appear flat, there is a gradual rise of just over 300 metres from Rolleston to the foot of the mountains at Springfield. This is good news for railway photographers, as locomotives have to work hard on the straight tracks that run alongside roads and good tracking shots are possible. I ventured to Westport by steam train behind Mainline Steam's J1211 on the first heritage trip to go there in October 1989. This is also the first time a large steam engine had ventured that far, as many of the bridges past Stillwater were still not strong enough before being upgraded for the heavier coal trains. My memories of the trip have begun to fade, and so it's with great anticipation that I look to rediscover the West Coast, especially the parts that are only accessible by train. At this time of year in October, with a bit of snow still on the top of the mountains and with the grass nice and green, it's ideal for great photographs, and for good measure, we've been blessed with perfect weather for this part of the journey. Springfield, where we're now leaving, had a major locomotive depot, and larger engines were added to trains for the climb through the mountains. It's now the home for a preservation group that has rescued some locomotives from the Grey River, where we'll pass later on our journey as we approach Greymouth. This is the first of 5 viaducts we cross, and 15 tunnels we'll pass through before we reach the summit at Arthur's Pass. Construction of the 212 kilometre railway line was started by the Midland Railway Company in 1886, and because of slow progress was taken over by the New Zealand government in 1900. This is staircase, and the viaduct we're about to cross is the highest on the line and carries the rail 73 metres above the river. The line had largely been completed from Greymouth to Otira on the western side of the mountains and from Rolleston to Broken River on the eastern side. However, it's not until the completion of the Otira Tunnel in 1923 that the whole line from Christchurch to Greymouth was opened. The viaduct ahead is at Broken River, and for 4 years from 1906 until 1910, the terminus of the line was on the Christchurch side of the gorge. From here, Greymouth-bound passengers had to undertake a hazardous stagecoach trip through to Otira before they could continue on their onward journey by train. We're now descending the well-known Cass Bank with Lake Sarah to our right. Cass Station, passing by on the left, has long been a maintenance base for this inhospitable section of track. With Mount White in the background, we're now back with the Waimakariri River, and once we've crossed it, we'll have our first photo stop just past Coral Inn. I get the chance to ride up front in the loco cab with driver Norm and fireman Alp as far as Arthur's Pass, as passengers are not allowed on the loco if there are any tunnels. Our locomotive is very similar to the powerful KB engines that worked in this area until the phasing out of steam in the late 1960s, and hasn't had to work very hard to get our small train up to the pass. 3 banking locos are waiting to take our train down the steep 1:33 grade to Otira, and as passengers are no longer able to ride through the 8.5 kilometre long tunnel, we get to go over the 1,000 metre high pass in a bus. This film, made in the late 1950s, shows 2 of the original EO-class electric locomotives that hauled trains through the tunnel from when it was opened in 1923. Construction of the tunnel was started in 1907, but because of the hard rock encountered, it took 16 years to complete, although trains were running as far as Arthur's Pass by 1914. This end of the tunnel was 250 metres lower than Arthur's Pass, and when it was open, one of the longest tunnels in the world. Electric locos were used until 1997, when the electrification was removed. Now a fleet of modified DX class diesel electric locos haul all the trains through the tunnel. We arrived just in time to see our train entering the yard, and once the banking locos are removed, the steam loco will be serviced and the water tanks filled by the maintenance team travelling with us on the train. The increased vegetation on this side of the mountains is in stark contrast to that on the other, and the generally overcast weather we've encountered is the reason. We'll follow alongside the Otira River down this picturesque valley as it gradually widens and dairy farms begin appearing. After passing through the crossing loop at Aikens, we'll follow alongside the Taramacau River, the source of a large amount of alluvial gold over the years. Passing by Lake Pourua, this route will take us to the Grey River Valley at Stillwater, just to the north of Greymouth. The passengers hop out for another photo stop at this crossing loop at Rotomanu, and after we get underway again, we'll shortly pass by the small station at Ruru. These stations were once very common throughout the country, but most have now disappeared, and this one is now listed as a heritage building. This was also the site of one of the largest sawmills on the west coast, and out to our right was an extensive bush tramway that was used to haul out native rimu logs for cutting in their mill. The mill was owned by the Lake Brunner Saw Milling Company, and they were the last in New Zealand to use a steam locomotive on a tramway, as we see in this late 1950s film. The Greymouth region was crisscrossed with bush tramways, and rival sawmills competed for cutting rights to the dense native bush that covered what is now productive farmland. Lake Brunner, we can see ahead, is the largest lake on the west coast and was named after Thomas Brunner, the early European explorer to the area who discovered it. The Moana goods shed and the railway station opposite have been restored by the local community, and for their efforts won an award from the Federation of Railway Organisations. The Arnold River, we can just see to the left through the trees, flows out of the lake, and we'll stay alongside it all the way to Stillwater. With the hills now behind us, it's pretty level all the way to Greymouth, and up to the north is the broad Grey Valley, with the Paparoa Range that separates it from the sea. We're just approaching the Stillwater Triangle, and we'll turn left to Greymouth, with the other leg connecting to the Westport line that we'll be heading up tomorrow morning. This yard, although still in use, was a major hub prior to the triangle being put in, and allows trains from Westport to head directly through to Christchurch. The Grey River looks somewhat dirty at the moment, and we'll stay alongside it all the way to Greymouth. We're passing the site of the Brunner coal mine and the suspension bridge, and the building remains on the opposite side of the river have now been preserved as a heritage area. In the late 1950s, with riverbank erosion being a major problem for the railway, a number of obsolete steam locos and wagons were pushed into the river around about here. Most of them are still there, however, some have been recovered and are now at Springfield, as you may have seen earlier. The new bridge at Rapahoe out to the right was opened in 2006 to replace a wooden bridge that was built 110 years earlier. Just across the road is the Greymouth railway station and is the destination of Kiwi Rail's highly acclaimed Trans-Alpine train journey. I made a short film about the area when I visited here in 2003, and here is the first part of it.
With a population of just over 10,000, Greymouth is the largest town on the west coast of New Zealand's South Island. It was laid out near the mouth of the Grey River at the beginning of the Westland gold boom in 1865. Three major industries have emerged since the arrival of Europeans around 140 years ago. Coal was discovered in the 1860s by early explorers to the region, and this was soon followed by the discovery of gold. The west coast has been endowed with high rainfall for millions of years. The gradual weathering effect of the rain has brought a steady stream of gold down from the mountains, and with a profuse growth of vegetation, large areas of forest and deposits of underground coal have formed.
Our train is stabled overnight at the Greymouth Loco Depot, which had one of only two roundhouses in New Zealand, and this 1950s film shows some of the old locos that were still in use at the time. These locos are part of the group that are now in their final resting place in the Grey River, where we have just gone past. That is, unless someone comes along to dig them up. The train pulls into the station at the start of our second day, where not that many years ago there was a large railway yard which is now occupied by shops. The remnants just across the road are of the Dobson coal mine, and it was one of a number alongside the river around here. This mine was the last, and it closed in 1968, with very little remaining. However, this old film footage gives some idea of its size. The Brunner mine on the other side of the river was the largest underground coal mine in New Zealand, and the suspension bridge built in 1876, along with the preserved remains of a few buildings, are all that is left of this once busy place. Just up ahead is a 3,500 tonne Canary, the last gold dredge remaining of more than 300 that worked around different parts of New Zealand. It was reconstructed from the dredge seen in this rare film, which after having recovered 202,000 ounces of gold, finished working in 1978 in the Taramacau River just south of Greymouth. During my filming trip here in 2003, I saw the new dredge working at Ngāhere and managed to get permission to film it up close, as it was on this side of the river at that time. It was closed down in 2004 after it used up its allocated permit area and was moved to the other side in 2009, exhausting its permit 2 years later. It dug up about 120,000 tonnes of gravel each week, from which it would recover about 120 ounces of gold. Maybe a future candidate for an interesting museum, it now sits idle as it awaits whatever its fate may be. Turning eastward out of the Grey Valley, the locos starts attacking the grade up to the Reefton saddle, the only hill we'll encounter on the line through to Westport. Reefton was laid out around 1870 after reefs of gold-bearing quartz were discovered in the surrounding hills, and has a population of about 1,000 and is still a busy mining town with both gold and coal mines in the vicinity.
Folks, just a reminder, we are scheduled to cross a coal train here, so please don't go out to the rail yard area, stay on the platform.
Underground mining for gold was a tough life, as shown in these very early film clips taken in a mine just to the south of Reefton. The quartz rock had to be broken down in the mine, then brought out in small trucks hauled by pit ponies before being pulverised by stampers and put in chemical tanks to separate the gold from the quartz. In 1888, Reefton became the first town in the southern hemisphere to have reticulated power and street lighting supplied by this power station. And the railway, built by the Midland Railway Company, reached the town not much later in 1892. Reefton has a rather interesting street layout as seen from the air, and has the distinction of being the home to the world's last single fairly steam loco. The railway yard is still a busy place, with a local group restoring the engine shed and station, gold-bearing concentrate being transported in these wagons to Otago, and a couple of local coal mines having loading facilities at the north end of the yard. While we wait for a coal train to pass at Cronadin, one carriage is quiet, while in another we have a less than quiet party with one very young passenger celebrating a second birthday with some friends. Many of the rail bridges along this section of track were used by road traffic as well, and the old road paving approaching this one can clearly be seen. This archive film from the 1950s shows the wooden truss bridge that spanned this stream along with a small station shelter, both of which are now very much a thing of the past. We're passing through the Hutt Railway Yard that was once busy with coal and timber being loaded into wagons for transporting out. Crossing over the Hutt River, we see the valley, which starts at Lake Rotawiti near Nelson, and on the other side of the Buller River, we'll turn west and follow it through to Westport. We get a somewhat wet but friendly welcome after what has been a great second day on the rails. Early in the morning I wandered down to the railway yard, where the weather, while still misty, had at least stopped raining. I was interested to see that many of the old buildings around the yard, such as the engine shed and goods shed, were still there. Over at the goods shed, I was met by some local enthusiasts who have rescued a small C-class engine from up the Buller Gorge and have collected a wide range of railway bits and pieces and stored them in the shed. Westport is a town with a population around 5,000 and is the centre of the local coal mining industry that has been located mainly to the north of the town since the 1870s. The interesting Coal Town Museum is sited with the local information centre, and I got there just before the remainder of our passengers arrived by bus. Last time I was in Westport, Coal Town was further out of town and has just recently reopened after being shifted to the more central location. It has an interesting collection of coal mining artefacts, especially from the Denison Incline Railway, and includes a winch drum and coal wagon that is mounted at the angle of the slope they ran up and down. One of the local shopkeepers suggested a local pub for a bite of lunch, and she was spot on with her recommendation. Back down at the railway station, I jumped on the train as it was being taken out to the main line to be turned on the triangle. This allows trains to come and go from the coal loading bins at Nukawa to either Westport or Stillwater, and has been installed since my earlier trip here. This old footage from the 1960s gives a view of coal being transported and loaded onto ships at Westport in the days before it was railed to Lyttelton for shipping overseas. These colour archive shots from the 1950s show the Westport Railway Yard being much the same as it is now, except for the newer railway station. With the weather starting to clear, we're all set for a good day riding the rails back to Greymouth, with a few local passengers coming along with us to Reefton. 5:24 a.m. on the 24th of May in 1968, the Inangahua area was rocked by a powerful 7.1 magnitude earthquake. The house on the newspaper article ended up under the landslide, and sadly, the 2 women inside did not survive. Fortunately, there was no other loss of life in the area, and although the bridge we're crossing survived intact, the rest of the railway did not fare so well. I took the opportunity to have a chat with some of the passengers that got on at Westport.
My name is Tania Cunningham and I live in Westport. We'd been a couple of years ago and we wanted to take the kids again on it. It's great. The kids have enjoyed it. It's got lots to look at and it's quite neat. My name's Megan Carey and I'm from Westport. It's the first time I think I've been on a train in New Zealand, a scenic train ride. It's great. Yeah, I love the scenery and the fact that the kids are really excited. It makes it all the more enjoyable.
My name is Nolene and I live in Westport. My brother works for the railway and he sent us a text yesterday to tell us the train was coming into town. He works on the gang up the gorge doing the tracks and things like that. He's done it for quite a few years. My father did it prior to that. So we decided to take the grandchildren on the trip today. So it's been lovely to come down through here.
Yeah. I thought you used to start walking through the paddock if you wanted to, right?
From the time the railway was open to Reefton, this section of line, with its 1 in 45 gradient, has been a headache for engine drivers attempting to get their loaded trains up to the summit. As can be seen in these archive film clips from the 1950s, assistance by banker engines was needed up the hill. They were uncoupled at the crossing loop on the other side of the tunnel at Taihape before returning to Reefton for the next train. Added to the difficulties for the crews, the summit of the line was in the middle of the tunnel, and to keep up with steam, they had to keep shoveling coal into the firebox right up to the entrance. Because huge amounts of smoke got into the cab once they were in the tunnel, to get fresh air, the driver and fireman had to get down on the floor and cover their faces with wet rags. We have now more than covered the full extent of the line from Christchurch to Westport, and I've noted only a few changes. The addition of some shops opposite the Greymouth station, a coal wagon on display at the Brunner mine site, and the turning triangles at Stillwater and Westport are some of them. Another is just ahead at Mainline, where there is an upgraded coal loading facility for coal coming down from an open cast mine at Giles Creek, across the other side of the Inangahua River from Frankton. This old bush locomotive was built in 1925 by Davison's foundry in Hokitika and stood where it is for over 40 years covered by bush, until eventually noticed and restored for display in 2001 in a newly created picnic area. Across the river is the town of Blackpool and the Roa coal mine, and they were connected by a rail bridge across the river from Ngāhiri until it was washed away by a flood in 1966. The Roa mine is still operating, however coal is now being transported by road to the stockpile we are about to pass at Stillwater before going by rail to Littleton. The piers for the old bridge to Rapahoe are still sitting in the middle of the river, and this bit of archive film shows the bridge as it was in the days of steam. Arriving back at Greymouth, our bus driver Ron is there waiting to take us to a hotel for the night, and early tomorrow morning he'll take us out to the Shantytown Heritage Park.
In 1968, a Greymouth resident visited Knott's Berry Farm in Los Angeles. He was inspired to build a replica mining township in Greymouth, and on his return home created enough interest to get the project started. The aim was to give visitors an experience of the everyday life of early European and Asian settlers. Shantytown has become an accurate representation of the buildings and businesses that flourished during those early times. At the peak of the gold rush in the 1860s, the area in and around Shantytown was home to some 5,000 prospectors and their families. The gaunt heaps of stones that the miners called tailings are now masked by the encroaching native bush. But at one time, the area was alive with Chinese diggers and wild colonial boys tearing into the land with gold dredges and sluices to prize out its glittering rewards. Shantytown is a living monument to these hardy pioneers who forded wild rivers and scrambled through rugged rainforest in search of their fortunes. It has become one of New Zealand's leading tourist attractions. Many of Shantytown's buildings have been recreated, and some have been moved to their present sites from other locations. The church, built in 1865 in the gold mining town of No Town, and the two-storied Ross Town Hall are two examples. Other shops and buildings commemorate the entrepreneurial talents of early shopkeepers and tradesmen. These men and women settling in a new land turned their hands to all types of work with primitive tools, forging the country we know now.
We bid farewell to Greymouth for the last time, as passengers get an opportunity to photograph the train leaving the station, climbing aboard once it clears the road crossing. Approaching Dobson, the monument beside the track commemorates George Dobson, the young surveyor who the town was named after in 1876 following his brutal murder on this spot. While we're waiting at Stillwater for the onward track clearance, we are entertained with some logs being loaded onto a wagon, along with a demonstration of shunting procedures, the West Coast way. We settle back for the last day's trip back to Christchurch, with some passengers more settled than others. Jackson's Tavern started out as a hotel in 1870 to cater for travellers coming from Christchurch in stagecoaches. Unfortunately, however, it is now closed. Otira was always a railway town, with a population of over 300 in the 1950s. However, when the electrification was removed in 1997, all the railway families moved out. The whole town was purchased by a family who leased out the houses and is now up for sale to anyone keen enough to buy it, with the added bonus of a hotel and a friendly native Kia. We all climb aboard the bus for the trip back over the pass and arrive in time to see our train coming out of the tunnel and crossing the river. We get put into the crossing loop at Coralin to let the faster Trans-Alpine train that has caught us up to go past. Our loco was now attacking the well-known Cass Bank, where many a photographer has taken snapshots of trains slowly climbing the long and steep 1 in 50 grade. Take the opportunity to have a chat with one of the passengers, who introduces himself as
Graham Shearer from Ipswich in Queensland, Australia. I was on the internet and I just googled New Zealand Steam excursion, and there was a choice of this one or the JA, and we had 2 weeks off, so I decided that we'd take this one. It's been excellent actually. The scenery's been brilliant, you know, rugged, inhospitable, which is the sort of trip I like.
Snubman's Creek Viaduct just coming into view on the left-hand side.
Over the next 10 kilometres, we'll cross 3 more viaducts and spend quite a bit of time underground as we pass through 15 tunnels.
I'm Hans Fens, coming from Denmark together with my wife. We have been to New Zealand 4 times in the past, and I love railways. We have been on excursions before here. Of course, follow the developments on the internet sites. And what triggered the dates was the celebrations around 150 years of the first railway in New Zealand.
Just before we arrived at Darfield, they had a fierce electrical storm, leaving a good covering of hailstones and knocking out the railway signals, forcing us to proceed extremely slowly.
Well, the good news is all the signals appear to have come back on. They're on here anyway, so we should get a slightly quicker run now back into Christchurch.
Approaching Christchurch, with 4 days riding on the rails behind me, I feel satisfied and note that although much of the country is changing at a fast pace, especially Christchurch, the West Coast has hardly changed at all. The relaxed atmosphere and the laid-back character of West Coasters is something that I've always cherished, and I guess I'll probably continue to do so, hopefully well into the future.